Let's turn to Luke chapter 24. I want to tell you some of my favourite little stories, and you've heard of them before, but I just think they're marvellous. Here are two scenarios. Every day, a gentleman went to work. Every day, he would ride the elevator all the way to the bottom floor of his high-rise apartment building. But when he came home from work, he would ride the elevator back only to the 6th floor. Then he would take the stairs up to his apartment, and he did that every day unless it was raining. If it was raining, he would ride the elevator all the way to the floor of his apartment. And here's another one to think about. Anne is lying on the floor, dead. There's broken glass and water all around her. Stuart is asleep on the couch, seemingly oblivious to the death that has occurred. How did Anne die? All right, I've set you a couple of mysteries, the sort of things that you might just walk into and you wonder, what has happened here? That's the story that we heard from Luke chapter 24. Some women walked into a tomb, and it was completely unexpected what they encountered. What have they walked into, and what does it mean to them and for us today? Well, in case you spend the rest of the sermon trying to figure out those two little mystery stories, let me put you out of your misery. Here's the first one. The reason the gentleman would only go to the 6th floor on his return home from work was because that was the highest button that he could reach on the elevator control panel. He was an extremely short man. But on wet days, he went to work with his umbrella, and he could use it to press the button the right height. In the second situation, Anne is a fish and Stuart is a cat. And the glass and the water all around Anne and the floor is from her fish bowl that Stuart successfully knocked over. There you are. Mystery solved. Well, here's our mystery. On Friday night, a man dies. He is buried on the same night. And on some day, some of his friends arrive at his tomb to care for his body, only to discover that it has gone. What has happened? Let's look at some of the background detail that Luke gives us in chapter 24 and then the end of chapter 23. The resurrection of Jesus is told in all four Gospels, but they each have different aspects. They're not all the same. There are some things that features uniquely in each Gospel. And so we are in this season, this year, we're looking at Luke's Gospel. So we're going to contain ourselves to the way Luke tells the story. And remember, Luke, at the beginning, chapter 1, verses 1 to 4, set out to lay out the facts of what has happened so that people could have confidence and believe. So let's bear in mind that Luke is presenting the facts clearly for the readers to then make a decision about whether they believe or not. So we see in chapter 23, after Jesus' death, in verse 51, Joseph of Arimathea takes Jesus' body down from the cross, wraps it in a linen cloth, and then puts it in a cave, basically a tomb that had been carved out of the rock. and it was a new tomb. It's thought that maybe it was reserved as his own tomb. Now, because it was the day of preparation, that is Friday, just on the eve of the Sabbath, 6 o'clock, you've only got till 6 o'clock to do anything before everything shuts down and the Sabbath is observed for 24 hours. And so Joseph and then the women who we've heard about in this story, they had to really rush to get the job done. And so while Joseph puts Jesus in the tomb in a hurried way, without the usual full body preparations, the women, they go and buy the spices that will be needed basically to wrap inside the body. Now, if you've been in Jerusalem, even today, you walk down some of those narrow streets and alleyways, there are spice sellers everywhere. You can just imagine them going along and getting a pound of this and a pound of that and a pound of that. There'd be pounds in those days. and so they go shopping. That's about all that they've got time to do. And then they mix up the spices. It says in verse 56, they returned and prepared the spices and ointments. Then they rest on the Sabbath day according to the commandment. So we've got a full 24 hours in which nothing can happen. Jesus is the one doing something in the grave. That's where all the action is for 24 hours. Then, verse 1, we come to the first day of the week. Now, the first day of the week technically begins at 6 p.m. or sundown on Saturday. That's when the first day begins. But it is at dawn that the women come taking the spices that they had prepared. That is, on the Friday evening, they come to the tomb to properly attend to the body of Jesus. They would take the linen off and then place the spices and the ointment of him with great reverence, wrap him up again. Then he would be prepared and left, and his body would be left there forever. Or so they thought. So they're on their way to the tomb, and we know in other stories that they're wondering how they're going to roll the stone away. Well, in actual fact, in this case, we'll just go back to the previous slide. The stone was not a problem. That's maybe why so many of them came. They were thinking, all right, if we all push together, we will be able to open up the stone. Now, the question we need to ask is how many were there in Luke's story? How many went to tend to his body? Well, we see the answer in verse 10 on their return. It was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other women with them who told this to the apostles. So other women, plural, means at least two. We're talking about 5 women here, at least, who are on this mission. I like to think of them as the Spice Girls. So they get to the tomb, and they're astonished to find that the tomb is actually open. Then they go in, and then they find there's no body. Can you imagine the shock? Where is the body? Where has he been taken? What has happened? Absolute perplex. Imagine the emotions these women have been through the last few days. And here's another one again, just absolutely rocking them. And then suddenly 2 men in dazzling clothes appear next to them. Now, that's not a way of describing a trendy bloke who is wearing something bright and shiny. No, it's a way of describing angels. Remember, angels come with and without wings. This is the wingless variety. They come standing beside them. Now, you need to picture in your mind the physical space that we're talking about. If you've been to Jerusalem, you've been into maybe the garden tomb, or you've been into the edicule in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, you'll basically know that, the tomb would kind of fit between that wall and Wayne and Louisa. That's about it. And maybe two berths, a bench cut out there for one body there and one body there. So there's a narrow sort of space, like a very narrow two-berth caravan, if you like, where 5 women at least and 2 angels are standing. They're actually bunched up like this together, and it's dark. There'll be a little bit of light coming in from the sunrise, the dawn, through the door. They probably came with some candles, some olive oil burning lamps, and so they're all crushed together like that. Can you imagine what they're feeling? And can you imagine the glorious smell as well of the spices that they've brought? And so these angels say, "He is not here. Why do you look for the living among the dead? He's not here, but has risen." And they're reminded that he said that this would happen when he was in Galilee, that he must be handed over to the hands of the sinners and be crucified, and on the third day rise again. There we have like the biblical formula that was already beginning to form, that is repeated many times in the New Testament about what the nature of the gospel is. And it's told there, almost, this is the gospel explanation. He has handed over, he is crucified for sinners and will rise again on the third day. This had to happen, and it has. Look around. He is not here. And then they remembered those words. Then they rushed back, perhaps with joy this time, still many mixed emotions. They rush back to where the disciples are gathering and tell the rest to the 11. And now we have their names listed, and they tell their story breathlessly to the male apostles and other females there as well. And yet they are not believed. They are not believed. But Peter thinks, well, maybe they are right. They are telling the truth. Maybe there is something here. He did say that this would happen. And so he goes, and we know that John went as well, and he goes and he looks in through the low entranceway into the tomb, and he sees the linen cloths lying by themselves. And then he went home amazed at what had happened. Now, in comparison to the other Gospels' accounts of the resurrection, it's very minimal. There's no glorious encounter with Jesus himself. It's all about presenting evidence, it seems to me. But I ask the question, if Luke is trying to write down and establish the facts clearly, he's presenting the evidence of why we should believe that Jesus was risen from the dead. Now, the fact that the linen cloth was there by itself is a very strong piece of evidence, because that cloth would not have been cheap to buy. If Jesus' body had been stolen by, I don't know, some disciples trying to concoct a rumor, the body would have been taken away wrapped in the linen cloth. The linen cloth was there because it wasn't needed anymore. That in itself is seen to be a very strong piece of empirical evidence that the resurrection is genuine, as is the emptiness of the tomb itself. But of course that is open to critique. That maybe the body was just stolen. So that's why the point of the linen cloth is in there to overcome that possible objection. But then I begin to think, well, if I was planning the resurrection, okay, if I was back in Heaven Central and just kind of planning how it was all going to play out on that day, and there were going to be some resurrection appearances, what would I do? What would you do? Who would you appear to if you were Jesus and you wanted to convince the world that you had been raised from the dead? Any thoughts about that? Trump? Oh, is that what he said? Well, yeah. That's right. I would have appeared to Pilate, Herod, and Caiaphas in the temple. And boy, that would have made a bang, wouldn't it? Ta-da! You know, there he is in his glory, and he's alive. And any doubts that you had about what he said would be utterly extinguished. Why didn't he do that? Why did he first of all appear to women? Now, you've got to think back to the cultural context, because the witness of a woman was of almost no account in a culture like that. Woman after woman after woman after woman. That's who he appears to. And they tell their account to the other disciples, and they're not believed by their close spiritual brothers and sisters. Not believed. That's not a strategy, is it, to get the word out about the greatest event in history? No. And then you'll see next Sunday, I think, another appearance to some disciples walking from Emmaus, from Jerusalem to Emmaus. They're going home. To disciples, to not great and well-known people, Jesus appears to them. Then we heard in 1 Corinthians 15, other people he appeared to, and 500 at one time, but they were all believers. Why would you do it like that if you wanted a credible story? All right. Well, on the other hand, you could say that Luke, if he was concocting a wonderful account of this, he would not have written it like that. He would have put in some credible men of high status who had witnessed to the resurrection. The very fact that you see it's the women predominating is in itself a sign of authenticity. No one would make that up. So that also helps us believe that it really happened like that. But it still doesn't answer the question about why appear to those people. Well, Jesus came to save the lost. And he came to raise up the least and the little people. The people that no one else thinks about. These were the people who believed in him and who followed him. And it was to them, those that he knew and loved, that he appeared to. He wasn't just using them as players in a divine drama. They were real relationships. And so it's a sign of his authenticity that he appears to them first. But it's also a sign to us as well that he truly did die for the lost, and the least, the ones who no one will listen to. He died for them. He died for you. He's got time to show himself to the Pilates, the Herods, and the Caiaphases, and on that great day of the general resurrection, the day of his coming in glory, they will see. He will indeed appear to them in great power. But for now, For those who are being saved, they got to see their Saviour. The ones who had followed him and had hoped against hope that it would indeed, the words that he said would come true, they got to see it. The promise fulfilled. He truly was their Saviour, and he truly is your Saviour and mine.